Warning, this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Hello and welcome to our new short format servings of consciously prepared brain food designed to improve your mental fitness. This is Lisa Cypers-Kamen, your host. For more than 12 years, we've been proudly and consistently crafting harvesting happiness and sharing it with you. Each week, we spotlight diverse thinkers and doers who are contemporary trendsetters and change agents devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. We invite you to listen up and change the way you think about human happiness. Our award-winning content is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Alrighty then, let's dive in. This episode offers psychosocial education designed to inspire and motivate our listeners. The information provided does not constitute a therapeutic relationship nor a substitute for professional mental health care. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, call 911, go to your nearest emergency room, or for listeners in the United States, text 988 for the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. This conversation was originally broadcast in January of 2019. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where you will learn about the perfect mask, what hides behind the face of depression. My guest today is Dr. Margaret Rutherford. She is the author of Perfectly Hidden Depression, which will be released in the fall of 2019. Dr. Rutherford was born in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and began her career after graduating from Rhodes College in Memphis with a degree in French. After living abroad, she worked as a jingle singer, also performing jazz at night. Her career path transitioned upon earning a music therapy degree from SMU, leading her to a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Texas, and the rest is history. She's been practicing ever since. Welcome, Dr. Rutherford. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you. I was busy back then.
You were busy. You're still busy in a different kind of way.
I've laughed because going from a jingle singer or a nightclub singer to a clinical psychologist, only took me 8 or 9 years, but it definitely proves that you can do whatever you want to do.
Indeed. Let's talk about that dark side, and I make it known to people who listen to the show and clients I work with that I'm a reformed depressed person. And so I'm always interested in visiting that dark side and destigmatizing what goes on under the human hood upstairs with our minds.
Well, good for you. It's a worthy effort. It's one of the reasons why I started blogging in the first place, was because I run into this, and especially in the South. We're just still behind other parts of the country as far as being more open about our vulnerabilities. And so when I began blogging, I certainly started talking about my own issues, a history of anorexia, anxiety disorder, and then I've had some personal chaos as well. I talk pretty openly about.
I like how you say that, personal chaos.
Yeah.
It's very dignified, actually.
Well, thank you very much. I am a doctor.
Yes. You don't just play one on a podcast. You are a real one. Let's talk about perfectionism, because I think that is a skeleton that lives in many of our closets and under our beds, and perhaps as our bedmates.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I certainly grew up being parented by a perfectionistic mother. And so I was surrounded by these kinds of signals, be they verbal or nonverbal, about what was expected of me. And she expected it of herself. It was just what she believed to be correct. And I have, as a therapist now for over 25 years, I have watched people walk in and sit on my sofa, and they begin to, when I ask some questions, they begin to tell me about things that have happened in their life. And Lisa, what I began noticing was that some of them did it with this huge smile on their face. They were totally detached from any kind of pain or emotion, and they would discount whatever had happened to them, be it a rape or a divorce or a sexual abuse of some kind or physical abuse in their childhood. And they'd say, that was a long time ago. And You asked me about it, so I told you, but and I began wondering what is going on with these people that they are so detached. Frankly, as a therapist, you have to listen pretty carefully to people like this, because if you just take your reaction to them from what they look like and what they appear to be, you really kind of think, well, nothing much is wrong. But underneath, there is this terrific self-loathing and shame and self-criticism and pressure to be very productive, and I've developed this whole syndrome that these people present with, that is or live their life by, that is very, very rigid and non-giving.
When we talk about perfectionism and people who present well, I'm sure I was one of those people at one time, that sort of looked and operated in the world. And my guess is you were as well. Then when you start to tease apart and see a little bit of cracks at the edges, you realize, well, yeah, it might look like it's all together, but oh my, there's some
You know,
percolation under there.
yes. Well, in fact, there can be intense percolation, and to use your term, and there's some wonderful researchers in Canada, Gordon Fleck, and his other name is escaping me right now. But anyway, they are finding these connections and strong correlations between suicide and perfectionism. So we're really looking at a situation that's very, very troubling. I've had all kinds of parents contact me. I've had some reporters contact me about teenage suicides or college suicides, that the person looked wonderful. They had lots of friends. They were very successful. They looked happy. And then all of a sudden they're jumped off a bridge or off a building or hung themselves or something. So it is a huge problem that I think we need to address very, very carefully, because we're going to miss these people. These people are going to fall through the therapeutic cracks, so to speak, of the system, because they don't look ill. They don't look sick. They don't look lonely, but they are ill and they are sick and they are lonely.
Well, loneliness is an epidemic. I mean, I think if we were to talk about a social or cultural ill in today's climate, there are lots of lonely people out there that
Hmm.
are suffering. They're isolating. I mean, you can speak more to this probably than I.
Do you know Jean? I'm going to mispronounce her last name. It's Twingy, or it's
Yes,
her.
yes.
Her work is fascinating, and
iGen, right? She's been on
I
the show before. I think it's iGen is her new book.
yes, yes, and I've read that book, and her research. She's a sociologist, for those of you listening who don't know her, and she has studied generational change for really. She's studied several different generations, and she sees the most change in this generation, and it's not a change in a positive direction. Well, she paints it that people are not this younger generation is not killing each other more, but they are killing themselves more. Their drinking has gone down, but drug use has gone up. I mean, they're different directions it's going, but it's not in a great direction.
Well, and if we look at I think it was the CDC just came out with a report recently that our life expectancy, the average life expectancy of an American has gone down by 1 month as a result of 70,000 overdose deaths and suicides in our country last year.
Wow. Wow, yeah. Suicide rates in all age groups except for 65 and over are going dramatically up. If I'm remembering correctly, it's men in their 40s, women in their 50s, and teenagers are actually increasing at the most alarming rate.
Yeah. So, Margaret, let me ask you a couple of questions about how you suggest we start these conversations with our children, with our partners, with our coworkers, with our colleagues, with our friends. How do you out yourself, have the conversation? You know what? I'm not doing as well as I would like. I need help. That takes courage.
Yes, it does. One of my beefs, Lisa, is that whenever someone kills themselves, like Kate Spade and when Anthony Bourdain killed themselves, here came on all the morning talk shows the same question about what depression looks like. And it's going to look like this, and this, and how parents can help their children. And they said, oh, you can look for these signs. And I thought to myself, I want to throw a pillow at the TV screen, because I wanted to say, no, what parents need to do is talk about their own vulnerabilities to their children. They need to talk about when they're sad, or when they get scared they're not going to be good at something, or some history they have of a problem. You model it, you teach that it's okay to have failures and weaknesses and be disappointed in yourself, or you can be angry, but you talk about it with your children, and therefore they learn that they can do that. That's really where it starts. You don't watch for signs of depression. I mean, of course you watch for signs of depression, but classic depression, but you also need to model this kind of openness with your kids.
I think you make a really good point because of my history, my family history, their dad's history. We talk about mental health in our house, and we have very open conversations. And my kids and their friends know that they can come here and just be and talk. And I think it is that telling one's story, right?
Right.
That we need to unburden, we need to share what's going on.
When I again started the blog back in 2012, and I can remember the first post I did on my own panic disorder, and there's still this part of me that thinks, okay, if I put this out on social media, will my phone stop ringing? No one will come to see me as a psychologist, because, well, she needs to heal herself. That's exactly the opposite of what has happened. People have written to me both for the podcast and for my blog post and said, you know, thank you for being real. It's ridiculous to think that just because you're a therapist, you don't have issues, and we like that you're talking about them. And so, if anything, it has been very rewarding and warming to hear that from people. And, I've so often, Lisa, I have a patient say, none of my friends know I'm coming to therapy. And one of my basic response is, well, pick one and tell them, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah,
tell them
share.
what's going on. And by far, people come back and say, you won't believe what I found out, that, she's on an antidepressant, or her husband is, or her children are, or they're going to therapy, or she struggled with this as well. People just don't talk about it. It's as if it is something that we're just supposed to take for granted, that everybody's mentally healthy and doing great. Well, no. In fact, maybe some days we are, but some days we're definitely not. And of course, if you have an actual mental illness, then you are trying to manage something that can be very difficult to do.
Talking about your own panic disorder,
Yeah.
being able to speak your truth about that, I would imagine as a doctor, as a clinician who is taking care of people, took a lot of courage.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't know how the quantity of it. I don't know if you know about the organization This Is My Brave. Jennifer Marshall is doing great work with that organization, and it's people coming and on stage and either reading a poem they've written, or talking about their story or a song, but somehow they reveal their mental illness. And we had one here in Northwest Arkansas, and I decided to uh, to perform, to do it. And it was amazing to me, because I thought it would be a breeze. I thought, oh, well, now you've been writing about this for so many years, it won't be anything. Well, in my particular piece, I also was talking about how you would know if you saw me that I was anxious, that I'm holding onto the chair, or I'm doing different things. I sit down suddenly. Um, and I tell you, Lisa, it was amazing to me and very humbling to realize that when I got up in front of an audience of people to say those things, I had panic. Because,
No, come on.
yeah, yeah, because it was just, I was being even more vulnerable.
Yeah.
I wasn't even just talking about having panic. I was saying, and this is how you know I have it. And so, that drive to hide, that need to hide can be so prevalent. And yet the more of us that come forward, I mean, I have people as patients who are wonderful, wonderful people. And when they tell me that no one knows about whatever they're struggling with, I just, you know, I understand that it's a privacy issue, and respect that. At the same time, as a culture, the more we talk about it, the more we will understand and then help each other make good decisions about our mental health.
Amen to that. Let's jump off for the break now. To learn more, please visit www.drmargaretrutherford.com. On Facebook, she's at Dr. Margaret Rutherford. And the book we're talking about today, which will be released in 2019, is Perfectly Hidden Depression. Here comes the break. We'll be right back. Research tells us that happiness is good for our health. Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and follow me on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for nutritious helpings of positive goodness. One thing I know for certain, happiness waits for no one, and at times we all need a little support. To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and at the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com to explore experiential online and on-site optimal lifestyle management consulting services, including recovery fortification and life crisis triage. And we're back, continuing the conversation with my guest today, Dr. Margaret Rutherford. We're talking about the perfect mask, what hides behind the face of depression. Let's return to that conversation. Welcome back to Harvesting Happiness Talk Radio. If you're just joining us now, we are dancing in the dark by outing and destigmatizing mental health challenges. My guest today is Dr. Margaret Rutherford, and we're talking about her book, Perfectly Hidden Depression. So, Margaret, before the break, you were sharing a little bit about your own story and getting up at This Is My Brain, an event that took place in your neck of the woods in Arkansas, and talking about how you would know if you were having a panic attack and the panic that you experience, sharing that.
Oh yeah, I tears came to my eyes, and the audience was wonderful. They got kind of quiet because they could see how emotional I was, and then I'm getting emotional thinking about it. They called from the audience, "Come on, you can do it." It was just so sweet, and I did. I was fine, and the other people on the panel were also. I mean, I was very moved by much of what they had to say. There was a guy that has bipolar disorder there, and he put his family through hell, and
Yeah.
and they yeah, and they were there, and he turned to them in a very vulnerable, open, wonderful way and just said, "I know I did, and I'm so sorry." It was way before he could accept himself what was going on with him. So, we have to remember that it is hard to love someone sometimes with mental illness, and just because we want them to be better, and unfortunately, much of that journey is an individual one. So we can support as much as we can, but we sometimes watch our loved ones become pretty self-destructive, and then we're there to help pick them up and dust them off, but they have to want to do that.
Let's talk about perfectionism as being highly overrated as well as normalcy.
Yes, well, perfectionism, again, it's not a bad thing in and of itself, but it's the kind of perfectionism I'm talking about in the book is one where it's taken way beyond the pale. It is not only, these are the kind of people that when they put something on their plate, nothing else comes off, and so their plates get more crowded, more crowded, more crowded. The syndrome that I've come up with has 10 different characteristics, and again, a syndrome is sort of like codependency. It's a group of behaviors that tend to stick together, and you find them when you find one, you tend to find them all. or at least most of them, things like these are people who count their blessings, and without realizing that it's okay to talk about some of the more negative things that are part of our daily experience. And they take a lot of responsibility. They have lots of friends, really sincere friends. They're very sincere givers, but at the same time, no one really knows them. They don't talk about themselves. So that kind of perfectionism can be very, very dangerous.
Well, it's, weaponizing control on a certain level, right? If I know everything about you and I'm always there for you, but never have to reveal anything about myself, that keeps me armored up, walled off, and safe in my mind.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Um, I have these people who have come to see me because of my writing or talking about it. And I don't mean to sound dramatic, but one girl, when she left therapy, looked at me and she said, "My mom and I have talked, and we know that I wouldn't be alive if I hadn't come into therapy." So she was about to marry somebody that she it was abusive to her, but it looked like the perfect relationship. And so she was extremely unhappy in it. And the only way she could think of escaping was suicide. So
Wow.
when she began unveiling and taking down that wall that you mentioned, brick by brick by brick, then she could see that there were other options for her, a lot of other
Wait,
options.
let's just stop for 1 second and just tell anybody that may be listening to this, suicide is not really a good option.
Right.
I mean,
What's up?
we never really say that in the course of our conversation when we're having interviews and talks like this. It's not a good idea.
Well, you can't take it back. You will deny the impact on people that you love. I believe I was talking to Michael Yapko, who's an international expert on depression. I was talking to him about the book, and I've been to several of his seminars. And he was kind enough to talk with me, and he reminded me that the three reasons why people commit suicide mostly are hopelessness, impulsivity, and they feel like, they feel like their family would be better off without them. So uh, anyway, those kinds of distortions in your own mind and feeling that that hopeless. Um, I know I talk with people all the time who feel suicidal, and yet they look back on it and think, "Oh my gosh, I could feel better. I just didn't think I could at that moment."
You
But
know,
you can't.
the other thing I think it's important to talk about is having the idea. There are times in many people's lives, myself included, where I thought, I'm tired. Like it's like
Mhm,
if it were over, it would be all right. It's not that
mhm.
I'm looking to do it.
Right. Well, no, and so a lot of people have that, Lisa, for sure. I think probably if some of the people that have struggled with suicidality with me were here to talk about it with us, they would remind us very quickly that depression can get so dark and so despairing that
Yes.
it does seem like a choice that makes sense, because that is just so hard to bear. Um, and I understand that and respect that and honor that. That is not what you and I are saying. I think
No, no, no.
it's just simply to say, it is, especially the part where you think your family or whomever would be better off without you. That is not how
That's an
family.
irrational belief.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And when we are in those states, we're not in our rational mind, that we're chemically altered, even if it's our own chemistry working against us, right? But we're not in our right mind.
Right. Right. That's right. So, um, it's so important to look at all these different things that can lead to someone seriously considering that choice. And I always feel much better when I ask somebody, "Well, how does it feel for you to have that thought?" And they look at me and they say, "It scares me." That's the answer I want to hear, that it scares them. Because when they start not getting scared about it, then that's when I worry.
Yeah. And the thought is just the thought. I mean, I think here's the other thing when we're talking about mental illness and mental health, right? The self-care
Right.
and optimal lifestyle required to manage mental health. I mean, I know for myself that is the secret sauce. Am I sleeping well? Am I exercising well? Am I eating well? Am I having good connected social engagement? Those are part of the mental health plan.
Of course. In fact, I remember learning in graduate school, the question you always ask someone when they say that they're struggling with suicidal thoughts, you say, who's your support system?
Yeah.
And if they look at you and say no one, then that's a problem, because our support systems, people who love us and who we love, will keep us fighting and will keep us um, engaged with life. And that's hard to do when you're significantly depressed.
Yeah. And in managing depression, and this is hard for many people who are doing so now that may be listening to this, the action becomes so challenging. And that's when it's really helpful to have an accountability partner, whether it is a friend. Therapy, of course, is essential, but maybe you're not there yet. Maybe getting yourself to a therapist is an absolute monumental task.
Yes. And of course, what do you have to overcome? You have to overcome trust issues or fear or just feeling like you're lame because you quote unquote need a therapist. And yet, a model of therapy that I love to talk about, Lisa, is that when you really think about what we admire in leaders, we want our leaders to be people who turn to other people for their advice.
Yeah.
We have a president with a cabinet. We have, we have.
Wait a sec. I couldn't help myself. Sorry.
Well, we hope that leaders are asking the advice of people that have different opinions than they do, or have a different perspective on life. So, or on that particular subject, whatever it is. And so, I like to think about therapy as almost like a therapist acting as a consultant. It just so happens that the topic happens to be the self. Your thinking, your emotions, your experience, any trauma in your life, that's the topic. But, after years of experience or just schooling or whatever, an education interest, then, therapists are people who spend hours of their weeks engaged in talking about that and trying to help people make the changes they want to make.
I love what you just said about being a consultant. That our mental health professionals, our therapists, are consultants who are there to guide us to self-improvement. Yeah.
Well, that's certainly my model. I mean, I know that there are plenty of other, theories, and certainly the relationship itself is very important. Sometimes a therapist is the only person you've ever met that would keep a confidence or not make fun of you if you laughed, or, I mean, if you cried or whatever. So, sometimes that relationship is vital, because it can be one where you think you either grow for the first time or you regrow a sense of trust.
Repair and reparenting.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I'm not saying that the relationship, but because calling it a consultant almost sounds a little objective, but at the same time, I think, especially for men, I think that way of talking about it and describing it would be more palatable for a lot of men who tend to. I did a study 3 or 4 years ago now, and just seeing about the gender differences and why women might not go to therapy and why men might not go, and definitely men. And this is no big whoop. I mean, it was no big surprise. For men, it was their stoicism that they should be able to, solve the problems themselves. And women's was more the fear of what other people would think.
We are out of time. Oh my gosh, this snuck up on me, which means we'll have to hang out more together. That's all.
Okay, that sounds great.
That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, actually. And I hope our listeners feel the same way about what you shared, because the more we talk about it, the more we normalize the conversation about mental health, and the more we're able to, express that V word, right? That vulnerability with one another, the more we see we're not separated and isolated, that we're all in this human process together.
You bet. You bet.
The book we've been talking about today, which will have a fall 2019 release, is Perfectly Hidden Depression. My guest today has been Dr. Margaret Rutherford. And to learn more about Dr. Rutherford's work, please visit drmargaretrutherford.com. And on Facebook, you can find her at Dr. Margaret Rutherford. And thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Margaret.
You're welcome. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks for joining me on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers-Kamen on behalf of my guest, Dr. Margaret Rutherford, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day, and remember to be kind to one another. Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes from our mental muscle toning libraries at harvestinghappinesstalkradio.com, toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about my global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following me on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced by me, Lisa Cypers-Kamen, Andrea Mengele, Robin Boyd, Andrea Daly, and the awesome team at Podfly Productions, including Eric Begay, Kimberly Beck, and Alec Gus, in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU, RadioMalibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.